Okay, Doug, if you don't mind, hit the record button because we will share this link out with everyone. And as Doug mentioned, we're here to talk about knowledge sharing and motivating virtual teams. This is the second of a three-part weekly series, 30-minute micro webinars that Doug and I decided to host because we find that we're all sort of in this bucket of, dealing with virtual teams, right? We're not in the office as much, so we thought this might be a timely subject to share some info and some insight around.
I see a red dot, so I think we're recording, man.
You got it. Next slide.
I just have to find my cursor. There we go.
Very good. Yeah, so by way of quick introductions, my name's Travis White. I'm the Director of Enterprise Sales at Degree. I'm super stoked to have my good friend, Dr. Doug Gray, on the call today. And he's going to be sharing a lot of really cool research with everyone. Just as a general overview, we are recording this call and we will be sharing the link out with everyone. You may or may not be muted at this point, but if you've got something to say, feel free to. We also encourage you, if you want to put something in the chat, we'll be circling back to those, and Doug and I will both be checking those throughout the call as well. And thanks for joining.
So let's start by talking about knowledge sharing. Brenda, thanks for your comments a minute ago. I think it's as simple as, where do you go to pull a bookshelf or a book off the bookshelf? For instance, you put the book in the shelf, you retrieve the book, you read it, you share whatever information you need to do with other people. And I think if you simplify virtual access to your content, your digital content, in those three buckets, it makes it simple. For instance, I'm going to prompt you. Where do you go to retrieve the copy of your personal property, say a condo or a home or a plot of land that you own? You know where you go. Where do you go to retrieve that email from your loved one that you need to follow up on? And you know where to go. It's as simple as that. We all have these default modes, and most of our retrieval is quick and simple. As a tip that I think many folks will benefit from, as I've gotten older, I use contacts and I take notes of whatever meeting I had with whatever person. I add the dates, nobody else can see it, I pull it up and I can retrieve it. That's as simple as it gets. So if you think about these three buckets, where do you store information, where do you retrieve it, where do you share it, it becomes easier. If you're part of a team in an organization where they tell you where you need to store it on a shared drive or some M drive or an access on SharePoint, you don't have a choice. But if you're an individual or an external consultant and you can choose from any number of platforms, I'd urge you to keep it accessible on multiple devices. That is not always the case. Why? Because you don't want to have one device that's got limited access to something. And cybersecurity is a critical need. So the point about knowledge sharing is really these two things. We need some kind of organizational culture. As Jennifer takes a new job in a new city, in a new state, she's got expertise, I'm picking on you, Jennifer, and knows the organizational vision, the mission, and the goals, and that the metrics that are going to drive success in that new environment. But she doesn't know the new people. So she needs some knowledge sharing relationships to build those new relationships in that new geography. Similarly, if you're perpetually skipping technology choices and you go from here to Zoom to email to phone calls to SharePoint, it's chaotic. It's so much easier to have one system for sharing and retrieving data. You may know this, but artificial intelligence is exploding. If you go to a lot of customer-facing client websites, maybe some of you manage these, the robots are there to track the quantity and the quality of your interactions. It's critically important. This is tapped into data analytics, and that information says things like, when you go to Amazon, users like you also, or consumers like you, shoppers like you. Same thing on Netflix. And also, organizations are screen scraping. So what that means at IBM, for instance, is that every time you touch a keyboard, and every time you're on a video, or on a meeting like this, the video's on, and it tracks your engagement. So if you look away or look down or you roll your eyes, that is digital data. What does that mean? It's a little creepy, but it means that that can be screen scraped and tracked if you are frustrated or a flight risk. Classic example is if Travis were to type in all caps to somebody this is what I don't like about Degreed, which you never do. I know that. It will be instantly sent to the HR folks at many companies, and they'll follow up with an automated reply. Do you need to schedule a meeting with your manager, with HR immediately? The reason we're tracking what's called pro-social behavior from all the desirable and constructive stuff you might do from destructive behavior. And it leads to a thing called behavioral nudges. These are kind of like the nudges you do to your child or your loved one when you want them to buy into whatever next decision you make. So how does this work at Degree? Travis, you got a story here about Ford?
Yeah, so I like to tell things through stories. And when we think about, just the general idea of knowledge sharing, I thought this one kind of jumped off the page. So Ford's Chief Learning Officer, Melanie Davis, recently did a Q&A, and a lot of it was talking about general things about the pandemic. One thing that she said that I thought that jumped off the page to me that I would have never really thought of, it was the first time in the history of Ford that production stopped. Now, it was a short period of time, but production actually stopped for the first time in history. So think about that. So, I mean, that tells you a lot about how big the actual, events that were taking place were, right? So one of the things when you think about knowledge sharing, and this goes in a number of different directions, but specifically with Melanie's role, she's looking at learning and development opportunities for their workforce. And how do you measure the transfer of knowledge is really the problem that was stated. And by way of quick direction, I forgot to put the footnote in here, but if anyone wants to go to our website, degreed.com, you can get to these. And I searched for Ford when I went to pull it back up to make sure that it would quickly populate. But there's a number of case studies like this where you can read through not only, what people are doing in general, but what they've done during the pandemic, right? So I thought Melanie's response on this was pretty, I'm curious what the group may think, if it's pretty standard across, how you measure the transfer of knowledge in your organizations. She very much takes a crawl, walk, run approach, right? So from a crawl standpoint, they look at engagement. How many people are active on the site, in this case, the Degreed site, completing things, viewing things, learning, taking training. So that's the first way they measure, and what they talk about crawl as they work toward the ultimate goal. The second is walk. It's skill ratings. People that have met, are they putting in their skill ratings? Are they working toward improving their specific skills? Consumption and engagement can be aligned to the company's core capabilities. So it's taking it from you build it, they came, now we're actually aligning that individual's skills and consumption to the company's core capabilities. And then long term, what they talked about as the run phase is aligning to business outcomes. And I think I would venture to say everyone on this call is looking for the business outcomes longer term. But when we talk about knowledge sharing and motivating teams, a lot of it does come down to business outcomes and how we align those goals with those individuals and how they buy into a larger company goal.
I like this. Some other folks have said crawl is all about what you can measure easily now, today, and walk is about what you might want to enter or measure in the future, or content that you might choose to share. And run is what you really strategically need to consider doing as you model agility or collaboration. Does that work?
Yep.
So I invite you to send that link out later. What we're doing is covering two topics here. If you notice, knowledge sharing. So here's our second topic, which is motivation. And this can be a little elusive. Travis, I know your kids. How do you motivate your kids? And I don't mean it to be sort of mystical. I mean it to be behavioral. And that's kind of what we're getting at. So by definition, motivation are the factors that influence individuals to work toward a common task. And I'm going to give you two models and a glimpse into some behavioral nudge software. You heard me use that phrase a few minutes ago. Why? Because behavioral economists are emerging. You might know of Daniel Kahneman and others who are the first psychologists to get a Nobel Prize. This is emerging. It's an exploding field, and it evolves from a guy named David McClellan, who was at Harvard years ago. If I asked you, Travis, I'm going to pick on you. What motivates you? Typically, it's one of these three buckets. You're achievement-oriented. You have a need to succeed. You're power-oriented. You have a need to influence others. Or you have an affiliation need to develop relationships with others. And one is stronger than the other. Any sense of which bubble is bigger for you?
For me, I think that the achievement, the need to succeed is probably my bigger, but I would also gravitate to probably the area where there's overlap because I certainly have need for relationships. I don't necessarily have the power need to influence others per se, so I probably gravitate more to the left side of that, but that's just me.
It's perfect. And it's easy enough to observe. We could look at your behavior, who you choose to respond to and how. We could look digitally at modifying words, adjectives, and adverbs. We could look at the number of positive and negative adjectives. You might know that 2/3 of the adjectives that exist in all languages are negative. Only 1/3 are positive. And we can look at how that changes over time. For instance, pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. I have a colleague who did some digital research using Twitter data to look at motivations. And I think it's fascinating. So the fact is, artificial intelligence can track these three motivations within any workforce, within a team. And you can track them if you've got somebody who's astute like Travis, who knows what typically motivates them, and you can respond as a manager or colleague to that person. The second way sometimes to think about motivation is with a triangle. And I invite you to do a screenshot or just write these down. If I ask you, to what extent was something a success, or to what extent are you a success? Some of you will say, if I got it done, the task orientation is number one. Come hell or high water, we lost 20% of our clients, but we got it done. That's a measure of success. Process folks will say, no, we need to comply with requirements in order for it to be a success. Thankfully, process people are accountants and attorneys and such. If we didn't have those protocols, we wouldn't have safe healthcare or financial transactions. And a third group of people in this triangle will say relationships are what define success. So to the extent that Travis builds relationships with other people and validates him and them and they move forward, that makes you a great salesperson, but it validates your measure of success. Where's your bigger circle now, Travis? I'm going to pick on you again. And then I'm going to ask, where should it be? Because it may be the same spot, I don't know. But where is it now?
I think it's probably close to the same spot, but it's certainly the relationships is the bigger part. But I'm also a task-oriented person. I'm the get up and make your bed to check that, make the bed task every day to sort of start off on the right foot. So I gravitate certainly toward the left-hand side of this as well.
And there's no overlap in the designs. They could be in anywhere. So if you can see my little cursor, I can find my cursor again. You're here, that's your place to start, and your work is to get here. So that's perhaps the thing that your manager needs to know. You're inclined to be relationship-based. You need to make sure you get it done with daily metrics or some kind of software behavioral nudges. That's where we're going. So what have you got here? I've made the point that behavioral nudges exist, kind of like the big creepy finger in the bottom left, and it's coming from recent research in behavioral economics. But what's this slide all about?
So I put together some screen grabs because I think especially in this virtual world, there's so many behavioral nudges that have become digital, right? That's you're achieving through software. And I think software can be a really great tool to help motivate. So what you're looking at, I know it may be kind of small on some screens, but on the left-hand side, this is an actual article that one of my colleagues at Degrade shared. I believe it was either earlier this week or end of last week. And when she did that, it automatically sent an email saying, hey, here's an article that Deb thought was valuable, take a look at it. So it was a nudge to say, okay, this is something for whatever reason, it could be a number of reasons. She shared that particular article. And for the record, that wasn't shared directly with me. It was shared with our entire organization. So it was something she found value in and wanted to share. The other things, behavioral nudges that occur within our platform is, I don't know if you can see the little pinkish red bubbles that say overdue. That's articles or training that's been assigned that's overdue. So once again, you're getting those nudges of an email or a visual nudge here in this case saying, hey, you need to take this. This just needs to be completed. And then once again, kind of small, but the opportunities link toward the bottom. These are actual positions that are open within our company. And based on my skill set, the software may be recommending, hey, have you aspired to this? Actually, a little more to the right, Doug. The other opportunities.
Oh, there we go.
So another, behavioral nudge to say, hey, have you ever thought about perhaps looking at this other job? So I think there's a number of ways that we can be nudged. But certainly with virtual teams, I think it's occurring more and more through software these days.
It is. Opt-out features come to mind with healthcare, for instance, and taxes and contributions. So what does this mean if you're interacting with somebody else? I want you to motivate other people, not only your loved ones, Travis, but the people you work with at Degreed and such. So here's a very simple model. It's got 5 points called Adfit, ADFIT, that I trademarked and validated globally because most managers have never been taught this. So here's the 1-minute introduction. If I knew how to assess Travis's signature strengths and his mindset using any information, there's free links at those 2 websites. And then if I knew that Travis was willing to change in some way, he's got a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. What do I mean? I have a fixed mindset toward opera. I'm sorry. I don't like it. I don't understand it. It's in another language and it's hard for me to hear. That's a fixed mindset. I have a growth mindset toward sharing digital information so that people can be better managers and leaders. And I have found that you can't coach everybody. Managers, if you've got somebody with a fixed mindset, they will not change over time. And they either need to change or you need to replace them. That's pretty strong, and I'm intentional about it. D is the second aspect of this model, and that's to define a meaningful objective or an outcome for that person. If you need a list, I'll send you one. I've found that there's 2 buckets here, performance buckets and behavior buckets. Performance is all about Travis attaining some sales quota by a certain period of time. Behavior is all about Travis's actions to get to that goal. And when we're clear on those outcomes, for instance, how many sales calls do you make per hour or minute, then it's possible for a manager to follow up on a regular frequency. So the F and the I and the T is what you and your manager might talk about weekly, let's say, or monthly. What do you want to focus on today? Have you considered this intervention, which is just a nerdy word for evidence-based protocols? We know what works. And the T is, what are you taking away from this conversation that you're going to do next? The point as a manager is that your job is to maximize the productivity of others. By definition, you wear this hat. My job is to maximize the productivity of others. And the primary skill of all managers is coaching. So if you're not familiar with this little model, it works great and it's simple. It's meant to be broad as the Mississippi River and deep as the Grand Canyon. You can apply it to behavioral coaching or consulting or any software, anywhere, and then keep notes. So let me sum up with a few practical tips that I've gleaned over time that anybody can imitate. And yes, I used to be a mountaineer, and no, that's not me. But this works. So if you don't have a team charter, create one. It's as simple as starting with a piece of paper and determine what your task outcomes are, your team goals, roles, and processes. Do it this way, GRP and I is a hierarchical model. If Travis's goal is X and my goal is Y, we're not going to be able to achieve the same outcome. And that's so common. It's a big predictor often of conflict. People have different goals and different reasons. But if you can come up with the same goal on a bigger flag and a bigger flagpole, it'll help everybody. That team charter could be short. It could be 1 page. If you co-create it with others as an activity, you review it periodically, say weekly or quarterly, it does increase virtual trust. Digital trust is a thing. Look at your buying habits on Amazon. You're more inclined to buy if you've got certain reviews from a bunch of strangers. Those could be paid reviews. They may not be verified consumers, but you will buy based on virtual trust. When you do this team charter, then everybody signs it, you date it, you post it, you put it on Google Docs, and you can reference it should you need to. That's a great activity to increase motivation. Second one, increase the recognition of differences. You may know this, but publicly traded companies with diversity on their boards outperform by some 40% publicly traded companies that are homogenous. And it doesn't matter if they're a bunch of white males or Indian people. The point is diversity fosters returns. So the 3 biggest motivators you already know are power, affiliation, and achievement. They'll, just like Travis's example, when I put them on the spot, those needs overlap and they're going to vary. You might have a need for power when you're disciplining your daughter. And you might have a need for achievement when you're working on providing value for some client. And they vary between people, and they change over time sometimes. The fact is that need for autonomy in your colleague is something you can say out loud. You know this model, so why not use the vocabulary? The need for creativity, the need for any of the signature strengths, if you choose to take that via character.org assessment, is something you can incorporate every day. If you ever get an email from me, it'll state my top 5 signature strengths, because I want to change the world. I want people to know what their strengths are and to leverage their strengths in their work worlds virtually. And there's a bunch of research about this. Third bucket, when we reward milestones, we're actually reinforcing, we're nudging the desired behaviors. We have a public celebration. So quiz question, Travis, I think you know the answer to this. What's a bigger motivator for people, cash or public recognition?
Public recognition.
That was quick. You're right. Other folks on this call might say, give me the cash, show me the money. But the bigger recognition is or the bigger motivator is public recognition. And that's as easy as doing what you just did right now on a Zoom call. When we have informal conference calls or Zoom calls, and everybody's got a drink in their hand and it's after hours, those are critically important for motivating teams. Informal calls can be scheduled as well as structured calls. And it doesn't matter whether you use Skype or FaceTime or WebEx, any of these platforms. The last point here, a contingent reward is when somebody does what they're expected to do and they get their bonus, or they get their comp. A non-contingent reward is out of that sequence. It's when you give somebody that dark chocolate or cash or public recognition or shout out. I think you've got lots of examples of this in digital tools that nudge our behaviors. Look at MyFitnessPal, Weight Watchers, Snap Habit. There are different ways to validate what you and your friends are reinforcing, and they certainly motivate people to lose weight, be active, pursue their goals, read books. So, where are we, Travis?
So I would invite everyone to take a screenshot of this, but also know that I'll follow up with an email that has the link to this recording. But Doug and I would love feedback. I mean, do you find this valuable? Is this a nice format? Any sort of thing that would help us improve, or just provide general feedback, any at all, would be greatly appreciated.
And I'm going to open it up. Our next one is?
And the next one, the final one in the 3-part series is, it looks like a typo here, maybe future virtual leadership micro webinars. Oh, I'm sorry. It's at the bottom. Leadership skills in virtual teams. So we're going to be looking at leadership skills next week. We've kind of altered the time to try to accommodate a lot of different schedules. So it's going to be a little later in the afternoon next Wednesday at 2 o'clock, but we would love to have you show up once again. And if you found this valuable, and next week's topic is a little broader with leadership skills, but I think it's going to be very worthwhile.
All right, everybody, please unmute yourselves and say something. We've got 4 minutes. What are you thinking? What are you taking away from this conversation that you might do next, please?
I still see a lot of folks on mute. So if you certainly don't have to, I don't want to pick on anyone, but any feedback for us? Is this, I'm not sure what sort of webinars you all attend, but we would love feedback. Just, is this helpful from a time standpoint? When Doug and I had originally talked about this idea, we talked about doing what we call micro webinars. So instead of being an hour or over an hour, just doing 30 minutes and keeping it brief. Was this attractive? Is there any feedback that anyone could provide to us on this specific format?
So my friend Jennifer, can you unmute yourself and say hello so I know that the system works, please? Or Brenda?
Yeah, the system works.
Thank you. I had that moment of insecurity when I thought, maybe I muted everybody by mistake.
I do like the fact that I've just learned how I can be tracked. Don't realize all that.
It's called surveillance capitalism. It's
Yeah.
creepy, and it's a reality. I'm often giving little lectures to our children who are in their 20s, and they never listen, Brenda.
Yeah.
Yeah, were you creeped out by that example?
A little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yep.
I guess that's how all the stuff follows us to Facebook. If I'm shopping for a new car, all of a sudden I start getting car notifications in Facebook. Similar. I didn't
Yeah.
realize that it was to the degree that some of the examples you shared, Doug.
Yeah, and it used to be we talked about a digital fingerprint or a thumbprint or something. Brenda, you've got a digital twin. And what's creepy about that twin is that you can't edit it. You can't modify it.
Oh,
Physicians on reputation.com look at their digital reputation and they ask, how do I get rid of this negative review? Because it's just not accurate. It's unfounded. Somebody's created fake news. And the fact is those doctors cannot do it very well. So there are companies that are emerging to manage your digital reputation. I'm told
that's
that
good to know.
20% of Facebook users are fake pronouns or profiles.
Wow.
Dead people, dogs, cats. It's creepy.
Mm.
So let's assume that we need to see each other's faces and that Brenda's a real person because you look like a real person in real time.
Yeah.
And Claire, thanks for the comment about the 30-minute webinar. Thanks for the validation there. And the fit structure, I agree. Like when Doug shared that, that's pretty interesting and certainly applicable. So we'll share this back with you so you guys can put some more thought into it.
William, you're being quiet. Anything?
I appreciate the shorter format, also conscious of the fact that this is about repetition, whether it's 5 or 27 times. My attraction to this was because of your work on OKR.
Yeah.
And I can relate to a lot of the things you were talking about. I always appreciate references to things like the behavioral nudge software and so on. So if you can include where to look for more information beyond the 30 minutes you spent on this, be appreciated.
Yeah, it might be a longer conversation. And I have a mentor who often says, Doug, just remember, repetition never hurts. Repetition never hurts.
Yeah.
And when he repeats it, he makes the point. Sometimes there's all kinds of emerging software that I invite you to just do a search for behavioral nudge software and you'll be astounded.
Yeah.
It's creepy, I think, how many there are. There are also some that are really productive and they target specific needs. And an example is an app called WoeBot, not robot, but WoeBot. And it's used to reduce anxiety and depression. And it's all artificial intelligence. It's creepy fast. And that bot has a sense of humor. So that's a good example. A second one is Happify, Happify, which is in my world of positive psychology. It helps us reward or reinforce desired behaviors. And it's evidence-based, unlike some of the others that are, frankly, pretty silly.
Interesting.
There's two, but I invite you to reach out anytime and we'll have a chat. So I think it's time to go. On that good note, we invite you to share this content with anybody that you wish at any time or reach out to us if you need to.
Yeah, if we missed the first one, is that going to be available alongside this?
Send us an email and Travis will send it out to you. You bet.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just by way of housekeeping for the group, I will likely have this link to be able to share back with you either later today or certainly no later than tomorrow morning. So be on the lookout.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate your participation and your comments and your questions. Woohoo! Let's go change the world.
Bye now.